Greetings and welcome back to CS133, Practical Programming with Python. We're still on week 1. This lesson today now is variables, but we're going over strings and integers. Alright, so the goal of the lesson is to introduce you into the two main types of variables, strings and integers. Right? So by the lesson you'll understand and demonstrate using these in a practice. Our success criteria is students will demonstrate understanding the difference between strings and integers and by creating variables and completing math problems using the appropriate strings and integers. So let's go over this. There are a few key concepts to this. We used numbers before just to show you what and how these variables worked, right? How you created it, right? You gave it a name, and then you set it to whatever you wanted to set to. Right? We'll go over, there are many different types of variables. We'll go over at least 4 different types in this class, but these are 2 of the biggest ones. Everything that we did last time was a number, also known as an integer. Right? Integers are whole numbers, right? Whole numbers. So 50 is a whole number. Now, strings are just characters. They could be numbers, but they could be exclamation points, letters, spaces, right? The key difference is an integer is a number. Therefore, you can do math with it, all of that. A string is just that, a string of characters. That's why I call it a string of characters. So you can't do math with this. If I put quotes around it, this is a string. If I put quotes around it, you cannot do math with it. A number, you can do math. A string, you cannot do math. Now, we'll get into what you can do later with that and how you can fix that and manipulate it. But at the end of the day, remember, both ways, every variable that you use, you are going to assign it the variable name, set it to, and then set to whatever you want to. So in this case, this is the number 50. The number 50, the integer 50, is what it's set to. Text is set to the string 50, right? You cannot add these two together as shown. Here are the error for you real quick. As shown by this demonstration. Text equals the string 50, right? Number equals 50 plus text. And again, remember, this is essentially what it's saying. Text calls whatever it was set to. So this is essentially what it's saying right there. 50 plus quotes 50. Again, this is set to it. So we can change it to different things. I can change it to 35, and then this would be 35. So let's go ahead and set it back to text. And as we run it, again, we get that error message there. You cannot add an integer. This is a good thing when we do our troubleshooting, unsupported operands for add, int, and string. Basically saying you can't add a string and an integer together. This is probably one of the more, other than, this doesn't necessarily probably make super sense to you, but int and string, right? You can't add them together, unsupported int and string. So this is fairly straightforward error message for you. And you can see, oh, this is a string. Now we'll get into some other aspects, especially when the code is far down and you don't actually see it. You're like, well, why is this not working? It looks like it should be working, but it's not working. Again, you need to figure out what text is. Is text a string or is it an integer? So, easy way to fix this, if I do this, now this is the number, and this is the equivalent of doing this, which does work. So let's run this again, and now we get 100. 50 plus 50 is 100. It's going to print 100. And it calls down whatever the value of number is and puts it into there. So therefore it works. Although now this isn't technically text anymore, per se. It's a number. But that would be a quick, easy way to fix this so it actually works. But I'm going to change it back to a thing. This will break it if we run it, because you cannot add them together. Now, that being said, you can clearly see that I can add integers together, right? We just did that. You can add 50 plus 50 equals 100. You can add integers together all day long. But you can also do, you can still add with strings. You can still add, at least you can still use the plus sign with strings. You just can't go in between the two. I can't do strings and integers. I do integers and integers. I do strings and strings. Let's see how that works. So we're going to learn a new vocab today, concatenation. So strings can be concatenated, what's called concatenation. And if we look at this, we have our first name equals first, our last name equals last. And when we look, we can concatenate them. Again, I don't want to say plus or add. Use the term concatenation. So when I print this, it's printing first and last. Although that doesn't look very pretty, right? There's no space there. There's no space. Because we didn't, right? This is first and this is last. There's no space anywhere there. So when you concatenate, it doesn't do English for you. Remember we said computers are very stupid. They do exactly what you say. Well, you told me to put them together, so I put them together. So if you want a space, you have to concatenate, and you can use a string. So this is also another good point which we'll use a lot, is you can take a string variable, add it to another string, and then add it and do as much as you want. So I could also add, this is my name, right? So you can add this together just by using what is a string. That makes a string. This is a string. The quotes makes it a string. So when we add this, that's how we got the space there. If I run it again, it's just going to add this last piece that we just added. And that is concatenation. All right, that is how you're able to do that. Now, it's really important to understand. I'll show you one more common error. So let me make this larger. Again, we have first name John, last name Doe. When we print first name and last name, it literally printed first name and last name. Again, I'll hashtag this out real quick, right? It just printed first name and last name. It didn't print John Doe. Why? Because there's quotes around this. I just mentioned that if you put quotes around something, it becomes a string. It is a string. That's the definition of a string, right? It has quotes around it, and then I'm concatenating it into last name. So that's why it is placed together. One other point while we're on the subject, if I put a space here and run it, that's how you get spaces in your text. And you probably saw me do it up here as well. I added a space here. If I don't add that space and run it, so key point as we're going through that. But back to this, again, if you want it to print first name and last name, I'm going to copy that out. If you wanted to say John Doe, you need to actually use a variable, right? The variable does not have the quotes around it. Now there's no space because, again, I didn't do this piece right here, but that is how you can. So watch out for that. I do see that a lot where students will go ahead and put quotes around that while they're beginning. So as soon as you kind of learn, and this is a variable, this is a string, and I also see that a lot of times when you actually do want that, plus, here's, whatever you want to say, right? And they're like, why is this not working? Well, because it's essentially saying the variable whatever, the variable you, the variable want, the variable to, and the variable say. You have to put quotes around the strings and no quotes around the variables as you're going through this. Quick side note as we go through this, creating variables. As far as I know, Python is the only language where this is how you set up a variable, where it's just variable name equals. Normally you specify Some languages like C# are very strict where you have to say this is a string. So you actually tell it that string text is a string, integer number is an integer. Other languages, where these are more common that I use and that I teach in these classes, is var text. It doesn't matter. I could do var number equals 50. This just says this is a variable, right? This is a variable. And PowerShell and PHP just use a $sign in it. And actually, then when you call it later, it has one. But again, side note, all languages have the same concept where you declare the name of it and then set it to it. The key difference with some of them is they actually tell you have to tell it it's a variable. But again, all of them work the same way for creating it. So that's it for strings and integers as far as putting together. So the next thing we are going to go over is the practice, which then after the practice you'll be able to try it yourself. So we'll try it together in the practice and you'll try it yourself.